Okay, welcome everybody to the second share. Pesachim, Perek Beis, Le'ili Nishmas, Imi Mayrasi, Rivka Bas Harav, Reb Shloimeh. May God bless my mother's soul, and with each of us who are studying here this evening, may her neshama have an aliyah. Once again, you can download a Mishnah on your tablets or phones. Go to the Apple Store or the Play Store and go to Mishnayot Kehati, K-E-H-A-T-I, and you could download a Mishnah. We're in Seder Moed, Mesechtes Pesachim, chapter 2. Now, actually, before we get to the second chapter, I just wanted to clarify something from the end of the Mishnah of the end of the Perek in Perek Aleph. Last week we spoke about Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, and it was a little confusing there. So I want to clarify. The disagreement between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer about something which is a state of suspension, tluya, we're not sure if it's tamei or not, and something which is certainly tamei. So let's read the end of the Mishnah. Al men nechlaku, what do they argue about? Ala tluya v'ala tmeya, on a situation where we have two different types of things. One is suspended, contaminated truma, which means we're not certain that it's contaminated in the first place, alatmeya, and on something which is certainly tamei. Rabbi Eliezer says tesarif zula atzmei v'zula atzmei. Rabbi Eliezer maintains that you keep them separate. Each one is burnt separately. Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yeshua says they can both be burnt together. Now, this has nothing to do necessarily with Pesach. This is just saying about a general argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua that have all year long, whether tluya, suspended truma, and certainly contaminated truma may be burnt together. Now it's interesting that one of the Mefarshim explained that the reason why Rabbi Eliezer explains that each of these have to be burnt separately and you can't just mix them together in order for them to be burnt is a fascinating idea, and that is that according to Rabbi Eliezer maintains that Mashiach can come at any point in time. And we await Mashiach's arrival at all times. So we don't take something that perhaps is tamei and mix it in together with something that certainly is tamei. Why? Because maybe right after we do that, Mashiach will come, and now we will have taken pure truma and have burnt it unnecessarily. So you see here, thousands of years ago in the Mishnah, that we were already concerned about, we're waiting for Mashiach, and we don't want to mix things unnecessarily. So that's why Rabbi Eliezer says you burn them separately. Okay, that was just a little correction from last week's shir, and now we are ready to start for this week. Ira, why don't you come on up? It's hard to talk. Okay, so Perek Beis, Kol Shah Shemuter Le'echel, so long as one is permitted to eat truma. Last week we spoke of different opinions as to what time you can eat. Chametz. So to what time you can eat chametz. So long as you can eat chametz, machal behema, you could take this very chametz and you could give it to an animal to eat, lachaya, la'oifis, to a bird, to a undomesticated animal like a deer or anything else, la'oifis, and to birds, umeichrei la'nochri, and you can also sell it to a guy, to a non-Jew, umuter b'hana'asei, and you may derive any benefit from the food. Over zmane, once the time of eating is over, then you are prohibited from deriving benefit from it.
Including selling to a guy.
Including selling it to a guy, and you can't give it to your animal. You can't do anything that you're going to derive benefit from it.
So why does it have to specifically in the beginning say you could sell to a guy and you could derive benefit? Isn't that included?
The point here is that any type of it's just giving a number of examples of ways that a person can benefit from food. Any of these examples are acceptable, and you can have any benefit that you can have all year round, even Erev Pesach in the morning. So long as you're allowed to eat it, you're allowed to do anything else. Once the time for eating is over, now you can no longer derive benefit from it. And what's more, now, what do we do on Erev Pesach with our...
Burn it.
No, but Erev Pesach, the chametz that we have left over, what do we do? We burn it, right? So now one would think that if I have to burn it, so let me at least put it into my oven, I'll burn it and create a fire, and I'll use it as fuel for my oven. Says the Mishnah, you cannot use it as fuel for an oven or a range. Why? Because then you're deriving benefit from it. Whatever fuel is being used for this, whatever food is being used for food, is a benefit. So you can't do that. Rabbi Yehuda says the following: Ein bir chametz ela sreifa. Bir chametz, getting rid of chametz, the only way to do it is to burn it. Now, where does he get this idea from? Why would he say that? You have to get rid of it. But once you have to get rid of it, why do you have to do that? So he brings it out. He learns from another halacha in the Torah. There is a thing called noisar. Noisar is sacrificial meat and sacrificial items that are left over longer than they are allowed. So if they're left over to the next day in certain instances, or things that are allowed for 2 days and a night, whatever it is, whatever the time whenever the time allotted is over, so whatever is left over is called noisar, and the Torah commands us to burn it. And so Rabbi Yehuda says that just like sacrificial items that have become noser, left over, must be burnt, so other things that are now no longer, they were once permitted, and now because a certain time has lapsed, and now have become prohibited because of a time constraint, such as chametz. Chametz was once permissible, and now it becomes prohibited at a certain time. So he says, just like noser has to be burned, he maintains that chametz also must be burned.
So not even like crumbs or anything.
Well, we're going to get to that in a moment. The Chachamim say, Af meforer v'zeire laruach imat layam. He may also crumble it and throw it into the wind, or cast it into the sea. Now, the term that af, he can also do this, means to say that even according to the sages, the Chachamim, they prefer that you burn it. However, they maintain that no hekesh, you can't learn it from noser. It's not the same thing. It's two different forbidden items. One is a sacrificial item, one is a non-sacrificial item. You can't learn one from the other. And so therefore, although the preferable way of getting rid of chametz on Erev Pesach is to burn it, but you can do other things also. You can make it inedible in other ways. Crumbling it and throwing it to the wind. It's spread out so much you can't do anything with it. Or you throw it into the sea. There's nothing, you can't do anything with it. And there's no benefit that's going to be derived from that. Okay, now we are holding Mishnah Beis. Chometz shel nochri she'over alav ha'pesach. Chometz, any leavened substance classified as chometz, that belongs to a non-Jew, she'over alav ha'pesach, that Pesach went into Pesach. So you have chometz and it belongs to a non-Jew. This is a very applicable law, especially in our times and in all times. You have now supermarkets with tons and tons of chametz in them. And now it's after Pesach. And the question is can you now go and buy that chametz? So the Mishnah tells us unequivocally, yes, you can buy that chametz because it belonged to a non-Jew. Ishal Yisra, Aser Bahana. But if it belonged to a Jew, on Pesach, so then you are not allowed to derive benefit from it. Shenemar, because it says in the pasuk, Lo yeroeh lecho sa'ur. B'chol gvulcha, thank you. That's not what the Mishnah says, but our Bal Koreh here is finishing the pasuk for us. So it says that no leaven shall be seen with you, meaning to say it's specific. With you, no leaven shall be seen over Pesach, but with a non-Jew, it's not a problem. He can have chametz, and there is no problem afterwards. Now, the Mishnah Gimel is going to take this a step further. This idea that if it belonged to a Jew, then you can't have it after Pesach. But if it belonged to a non-Jew, then you could have it after Pesach. Now we're going to get a little bit clouded here. What happens in a case, Gimel, Mishnah Gimel, Nachri Shehilvas Yisrael al Chametzai. What happens if you have a non-Jew who loaned money to a Jewish person al Chametzai, with the Jew's chametz as collateral? So a Jew, let's say for argument's sake, has barrels of beer. Yes, we're going to use an example. He has a barrel of beer. A barrel of beer is worth how much?
$1,000.
$1,000. Okay, thank you. $1,000. It's a fine beer, an imported beer from where?
Poland.
Germany.
Okay, nice German beer, and it's worth $1,000. So the non-Jew says, okay, you want me to loan you money? I'll loan you money, but give me the barrel of beer as a collateral. Okay. Now what happens is, after Pesach, the Jew goes and he pays back the loan. So now he goes and he receives back his barrel of beer. Now, to whom did this barrel of beer belong to?
A Jew.
A Jew, right? Ostensibly. So the Mishnah tells us, on a surface level at least, and again we're going to explain, the Gemara talks about this and quantifies this exact example. And the Gemara, and so let's use the plain example of the Mishnah. We took the barrel of beer. He gives it to the non-Jew. He pays the non-Jew back after Pesach. He retrieves his barrel. Says the Mishnah that it is muter bahana. He is allowed to derive benefit from it.
Oh, because it was
the property of the non-Jew. Now, again, the Gemara quantifies this and explains that this halacha of the Mishnah cannot be accepted literally as we just said it, but it's only limited to a case where two conditions are met. One, that in the loan there is a stipulated agreement that if the Jew defaults on the loan by a certain date, that the non-Jew owns the barrel of beer retroactively.
Wow.
That's number one. Number two is that the barrel of beer is not in the home of the Jew. The barrel of beer was actually transferred to the non-Jew's domain. And in such a case, because the non-Jew has it, and he has the rights to it retroactively if the Jew defaults on his loan, that's considered enough of out of the Jew's possession, and therefore after Pesach, the Jew can have benefit from the barrel of wine.
I have a question real quick.
So do I. You go first.
All right, we'll take a question.
Throughout the process, throughout the term of the loan, so to speak, the Nachri couldn't sell.
Correct.
Or do anything with
Correct.
it. Which means that it still belonged to the Jew.
But enough of it. So as the Gemara is explaining, it's enough out of the reshus in such a case where these two stipulations are met. It's enough out of the possession of the Jew that it's out of the that it's enough. It should be noted that chametz that goes over chametz that existed that belonged to a Jew over Pesach is not usher from a Torah perspective. It's only usher from a rabbinical perspective. And so therefore, the question here is to what degree did the Chachamim, did the sages establish this prohibition? So they're the one who the ones who made the prohibition can make limitations to their prohibition.
Sure.
You had a question?
A quick question was, what is the timing that the transfer of the barrel of beer has to go out of the before, is it by
before
the fifth
Pesach?
shot? It could be 10 minutes before Yom Tov?
So long as you are allowed to eat from it,
Right.
so you can have any hana, including using it as collateral for a loan with these two conditions met that we said before, and it's out of your possession. Yeah.
But I'm saying that if let's say after the fifth shot it has to go through beer.
Again,
pardon the pun.
Again, in the previous Perek,
Right.
we had a discussion as to till what point you can eat it.
Right.
So long as you can eat it, you can have any hana from it.
Okay. So if he made a delivery 3 hours later after the Zman,
No, absolutely not. Then it's already, it belonged to a Jew even for one moment on Pesach, and it can no longer be benefited even after Pesach.
And if he turns out that he defaulted on the loan,
Then it belongs to the guy for sure.
But didn't the Jew say the beer bracha? And if he said that bracha, it says Zeikr b'shusi, delay b'shusi, or whatever. So then it shouldn't be a problem to begin.
Well, yes and no. When you make a beer chametz, only items that you want to be in that are considered as naught and nothing. For example, let me give you an example. Using the example of the barrel of beer. When you make your declaration that all the chametz that I have is ownerless and it's not, whether it's in my possession or not my possession, do you really mean that in relation to this barrel of beer? No, you're using this barrel of beer as collateral for a loan. You don't want it to disappear from your ownership, and so therefore you own some measure of it.
But is it part of my selling of the chametz?
No, because you can't sell. How could you sell it? It's used as collateral. That's taken out of your possession in the first place. So again, according to Chazal, this is enough out of your possession. You don't really own it.
You don't
really own it.
This term. Yeah.
So it's not biblically prohibited. It's not really yours during this period of time. Conversely, what happens? What happens if a Jew loans money to a non-Jew, and the non-Jew's barrel, we're going to use the example of a barrel of beer, is being used as a collateral? So it's the same rule. Right. After Pesach, because to a great degree, it now belongs to the Jew. Because if the non-Jew defaults on his loan, it's going to belong to him all along. So therefore, it actually belongs to him now. And it's Asr Bahana after Pesach.
This concept can be brought down if a guy owns a store, a Jewish guy owns a store filled with groceries and whatever. He takes a loan against this store.
Well, yeah, it has real application. Sure. The Mishnah is not giving you hypothetical cases. We're talking things that have real consequences and real information for our time now. Now, let's continue the Mishnah. What happens if a rune falls on existing chametz? So you have a chametz in a house or a hut or whatever it is, and
it's buried.
And it gets buried in the rubble. Rabbi Gamliel says the Mishnah, it is considered gotten rid of.
Destroyed.
That's it. Rabbi Gamliel clarifies this point. He does not argue, but he clarifies. When does a rune falling on chametz negate the presence? So long as a dog can't reach to it, which is about 3 tvachim, if it's just buried lightly in some dust and a dog will be able to come, move it off and eat it, so that is not considered as removed. That's not considered gotten rid of, and so that's not sufficient. Okay, now we are on Mishnah Daled, and here I'm going to first read the halacha, and then I'm going to clarify and give explanation as to what exactly all this means. Someone who eats truma of chametz on Pesach, and we're talking about here in the Mishnah a non-kohen. If he does this inadvertently, so then he will have to pay keren v'chomesh, Keren is the principal amount, and a fifth. A fifth, just a general understanding, whenever the Mishnah or the Gemara talks about a fifth, it talks about a fifth portion. It's actually 25%. So the easiest way to understand this is if you have is a dollar that has 4 quarters in it. So a dollar is 4 quarters. The fifth is referring to a fifth quarter, not 20%. So, and that's throughout the Torah, throughout the Mishnah, throughout the Gemara, throughout Halacha. Whenever it requires you to pay a fifth, it means a fifth quarter, 25%. So, in such a case, a person eats it inadvertently. Now, he has to pay Keren and a Chomish, the principal and a fifth. Now, what does this mean? Well, before we continue, forget about Pesach. Let's say a Jew who's a non-Kohen eats Truma at any time during the year, inadvertently, by accident. Now, it's a serious crime to eat Truma if you're not a Kohen. Now, the Torah gives us the ability to do teshuvah in the following way. You pay Keren v'chomish. One part of your teshuvah is you pay the principal plus 25%, plus a fifth quarter. That is the recipe for teshuvah for a person who made a mistake. Now, here we're talking about it's chametz, so it doesn't really belong to anybody. Normally speaking, chametz, that is truma chametz, belongs to whom? The Kohanim collectively. Right. So now when you pay the Keren and the Chomish, who do you pay it to? Any Kohen. Right. Just like you would have given the truma to a Kohen. Now you give the principal and the extra 25% to any Kohen of your choosing. And that is one part of the recipe of your teshuvah, of your repentance. But on Pesach, there's nobody who owns it. So says the Mishnah, still in all, you could give the Keren and the Chomish to any Kohen, and that's still a recipe for your teshuvah. That's if you do it inadvertently. But what happens if you did it purposefully? You ate Truma, that was Chametz on Pesach. So a person who eats Truma purposefully, a non-Kohen that eats Truma purposefully, he doesn't have this recipe for teshuvah. He has to do teshuvah in other ways. It's not so simple. And so therefore, Potter mitashlumim umedmei eitzim. He's exempt. He doesn't have to pay anything to anybody. Why? Because it didn't belong to the Kohanim collectively. He essentially stole from nobody. And as far as teshuvah is concerned, this is not a pathway to teshuvah for him. He has to do teshuvah other ways.
So how come?
But it says if you eat chametz on Pesach, v'nichreta nefesh.
If you eat chametz on Pesach, v'nichreta nefesh, you can have kares, which is spiritual excision. But that, just because you have spiritual excision doesn't mean you don't have a pathway to teshuvah. People who violate prohibitions that will incur, even b'mezid. There's nothing that stands in the way of teshuvah. Now, even a person who does, I'll give you even a greater example. Even a person who violates a commandment that will incur the death penalty from a bezdin, he could do teshuvah. The bezdin is going to still execute him, but he has to do teshuvah. And in fact, before we execute a person, right before Dalar Amis, before he gets to the place of execution, they tell him, confess your sins and do teshuvah. Because you want it to be a full teshuvah. So teshuvah, the fact that the person did it b'mezid, means that he has to do teshuvah in a different way. But giving a Kohen, a Keren, a Chomish, that's not a pathway for him to do teshuvah.
So why are they not mechayiv if they're shogeg to bring like a parchatas or a hell?
Yeah, so there is karbanis that go along with that too. Okay. But here we're just talking about the remuneration, paying the money back. Okay. Hey. So now we're changing the subject here. These are the species of grain that a person can fulfill his obligation by eating matzos made out of these substances, made out of these grains on Pesach. What are they? Bechitin, besairin, bechusmin, veshifin, veshiboiles shual. That is wheat, barley, spelt, rye, and oats. So if a person has matzah made out of any of those 5 grains, so then he can fulfill his obligation with eating matzah on Pesach. Now, v'yetzin b'demai. Now comes a little bit of a complicated halacha, which was going to require explanation. A person could fulfill his obligation by eating matzah that is demai. What is demai? I will explain that right now. Demai means grains that, or foods that we are unsure whether trumas and maasros were taken from them. And specifically, we use demai for a situation. I shouldn't say specifically, but most often we use demai for a situation in which an am haaretz, a regular, non-scrupulous person, who's non-scrupulous with Torah and mitzvahs, claims that, yeah, I took off truma, maasros, and all of that. I did it all. And we're unsure, did he really do it or did he not really do it? So Chazal say, we don't trust him. They're on Shabbos, we do trust him. There's many, many laws. We can't go through them all at this point.
Is that the reason why we take away the bread from the chunk of?
We're going to talk about challah in a minute. That's not challah. Challah is a separate thing. We're talking about trumas and maasros. So a person who's not believed to have taken off maasros, so now it's called demai. Now demai, Chazal said, according to the Torah, only a situation where you know something has not had its trumas and maasros taken off, you're not allowed to eat it. But if you're not sure, maybe you could eat it. Chazal say we call it demai. Even if, in certain cases, even if a Jew tells you, I took it all, I separated the appropriate tithes, you don't believe him. And it's called demai. It's a question of, it's of questionable kosherness. In any case, so now what happens is that although our sages prohibited Jewish people from eating demai, there are certain times that they allowed it. For example, a poor person. You have a poor person, and he goes around begging for food, and he goes to an Amma Aretz's door, he goes to an unscrupulous person's door, knocks on the door, he says, can I have some food? And they give him food. He asked, did you take off Meiser? And he says, yes. So now you're going to tell him, oh no, you can't believe him? And now he doesn't have supper. Or now he has to start removing additional tithes from the food. He doesn't have food to eat. So the sages limited their decree onto normal circumstances. But in extenuating circumstances such as this one, and others, we'll get to those. We don't necessarily, we'll get to those throughout Mishnayos, but this is a good example. They did not extend their prohibition. So, and in truth, any person at any time could disavow, he could write off all his belongings to somebody else, who will then later, at a later point, give it back to him, and he can eat it. And for example, gaboy tzedakah, people who give out tzedakah, they can collect grains and foods from everybody in the community, and so long as and they're presumed to have been in a state where the tithes have been taken off, and they could give it out to everybody. A person who's traveling, he doesn't have any more money on him, he is allowed to eat demai, because right now he's in a poor state, even though far away he has lots of money. But right now he doesn't have what to eat. So he can also eat this demai.
So is it possible that it's even tevel?
Tevel, it's theoretically possible that it's tevel, but we don't know. The question is, do we trust this Jew at this time and point or not? So our sages made a decree, you don't believe him, generally speaking, but in certain cases, we will believe him. Again, going back to the principle that we said before, when the sages make a decree, they are licensed to control when this decree will apply and when it doesn't. That's it. So v'yetzim b'demai. So a person who's eating matzahs that were made from grains that are in the demai state, he fulfills his obligation to eat, if he eats these matzahs on the first night of Pesach. Further, v'maiser ishin shnitla trumasa. And this is going to require a little bit more explanation. He also can fulfill his obligation with Meiser Rishon that the Truma was already taken. Now, what this means is as follows. First, you take off a person who reaps his harvest. So now he takes off Truma, which is about approximately 2% of the whole amount. Then he takes Meiser Rishon, and he gives it to the Levi. It's a tithe, and he gives it to the Levi. That Levi takes a tithe of the tithe, which is called Trumas Meiser, a Truma from the tithe, and he gives it to the Kohen. Then the Jew goes and he takes Meiser Sheni, a second set of tithes. Now, sometimes it's for Aniyim, and sometimes it's for the poor, this second tithe, and sometimes it's taken up to Yerushalayim and eaten in Yerushalayim. And we're going to get to that in a minute. But before we get to that, so the first case is Uva Meiser Rishon Shenital Trumasei. So ordinarily speaking, the Gemara explains that obviously this is not talking about a simple case as this. Because if you just read the Mishnah in its literal sense, it's beyond obvious. A person took off Truma, then he would take off Meiser Rishon, and then the Levi would take off a Truma of that. So then after that point, the Meiser that remains, what's left of his Meiser in his possession, is completely non-consecrated. It's chulin. He could do whatever he wants with it. So it's obvious, it's beyond obvious that he could use that to make matzah. Not only could he eat it as a Levi, but he could give it to an Israelite, a Yisrael. It's absolute chulin. So what would be the novelty of the Mishnah? So therefore, the Gemara limits the case of the Mishnah to be talking about something somewhat more complicated. You see, in order for Meiser to be taken, Trumas and Meishers to be taken properly, so the grains and the foods have to meet the Oina LaMeisers. They have to be 2/3 of the way ready, ripe. And then you are able to separate Trumas and Meisers from them. But here we're talking about a case where a person cut off his grains before the time of Truma and Meiser. So he skipped the Truma, right? He skipped the Truma, because it's not the time for Truma, gave Meiser to a Levi. The Levi now goes and takes from this Meiser, and he gives the Truma Meiser to the Kohen. So now, in such a case, even though there was no Truma ever taken from this in the first place. Why? Because it never reached the time of Truma in the first place. So in such a case, even though no Truma was taken, it's not Tevel, it's not real. And you could fulfill your obligation on a non-Trumad produce.
And do you factor in where this came from, that it was separated from Eretz Yisrael?
Doesn't matter where it was separated. In other words, that's not relevant here. The point here is that we skipped a step in the process. We could still use it for our matzahs for Pesach.
Wow.
Now, uva Meiser Sheni v'hekdesh sheniftu. Meiser Sheni, we said before, is the second tithe after a person gives his tithe to the Levi. So he takes another set of tithes. And of those tithes, in certain years, he is called Meiser Sheni. It's the second tithe. And he takes that food and he eats it and he enjoys it in Yerushalayim. Now, if he has a lot of grains and a lot of produce, so what does he do? He can redeem it and take the money to Yerushalayim and spend it there on food. Now, once a person redeems his produce, so now that produce is chulin. It's non-consecrated. And so the Mishnah is telling us that a person, once he's redeemed it, he can now use that for matzahs as well. What's more, hekdesh, if somebody dedicates something to the holy temple, it becomes holy. You cannot derive benefit from it. What you can do is you can redeem it. It can be redeemed. And then the money goes to the holy temple, to the Beis HaMikdash. So the Mishnah is telling us here that in any of these cases, once it reverts back to a chulin state, to a non-consecrated state, you can use this for matzah. What's more, v'hakoyanim, what about a kohen? He could use his challah separations. A person makes dough, and if it's kosher lePesach, he could you separate a piece of that dough and you give it to the kohen. That kohen could make a matzah out of it and use it for his matzah on Pesach. Or alternatively, truma. If you give a truma to a kohen and it's holy food, he can now use this for his matzah on Pesach as well. Avalei b'tevel, but foods that were not, trumas and meisters were not taken, and hence cannot be eaten, obviously cannot be used for matzah on Pesach. As well as meiser rishon, that the truma meiser, the meiser that the Levi is now giving, is also, that wasn't, if the Levi didn't give his meiser yet, so he can't take his meiser rishon and use that for matzahs on Pesach. Furthermore, meiser sheni and hekdesh that was not redeemed, as we just explained, in such a case, you can't use it for truma, for chalas on Pesach. You can't fulfill your obligation with this. Now, what about chalas teider kiki nozer? What happens if a person made chalos? Over here, we don't mean literal chalos that, like we talk about in our day, that are leavened, because obviously that's not matzah. But as we explained in last week's shir, there were 40 loaves that were given with a carbon taida. Now, only 10 of those were chametz. Now, a person bakes 30 of these loaves were non-chametz. So if a person made these with the intention of using them for a carbon taida, right? Now, he didn't bring his carbon taida. So the chametz he got rid of, and now he still has 30 loaves of them. And they're matzahs. And they only have a minute amount of oil. So they're not considered matzahs hashira. They're not considered enriched matzahs, because there's only a small amount of oil in them. And now he wants to use these for his chametz, for his matzah on Pesach Seder. So says the Mishnah, if he made this for himself in Yitzeben, he cannot fulfill his obligation for matzah on Pesach on it. Why? Because he dedicated these for a carbon. And once he dedicated them for a carbon, they can't be used for anything else, for him to eat as matzah on Pesach. But ason limkor bashuk, but if he made it before Pesach to sell in the marketplace, and he made many of them and they weren't all sold, so then Yetzimehen, then he can fulfill his obligation. And the reason is because when a person makes matzos to sell for a carbon toida that he's going to sell to other people, he has in mind that maybe he's not going to sell all of them. And if he doesn't, right, from the beginning, he recognizes that he will be able to eat them himself and use them for other purposes. If he doesn't sell them out, he's going to bring them home and use them. And so therefore, it was this stipulation is apparent when he first made them, because he was planning on selling them. So it's obviously, he had the idea, if he doesn't sell them, he'll bring them home and eat them, and then he can use them for matzah on Pesach. Mishnah Vav. These are the greens that a person could use for maror on Pesach. So, bechazeres, a person could use lettuce, v'ulshin, endives, uvesamcha, horseradish, uvechar chavina, or char chavina. The Gemara identifies this as the vine growing around palms. Uvemaror, Rashi says that this is wormwood, and others say that maror means it's a generic term for any bitter herb. Okay, in any case, Yetzim ben lachen ben yeveshin, so a person can fulfill his obligation for maror whether they are moist or they are dried out. But not if they are preserved, stewed, or boiled. In any of these cases, they cannot be used for maror on Pesach. And one type could be combined with another type. All of these types are allowed, and you can mix the two so long as they form the size of an olive. And you can fulfill your obligation with their stalks. And now again, I'm not going to go through the whole explanation again, but it's the same idea as by matzahs. You can fulfill your obligation with demai or with ma'aser rishon shnetla trumasa, and the same explanation as we said before applies here. Or ma'aser sheni v'hegdish sheniftu, or in a case of ma'aser sheni or hegdish that was redeemed. Again, this is the same reasoning and the same idea that we said before in relation to matzah on Pesach. Ein sheirin es amursen, we're on the 7th Mishnah. One may not soak bran laterna goylim for chickens. Avol choltin. So you can't take raw bran, and soak it in water to feed to your chickens. Why? Because what's going to happen if you soak it in the bran? It's going to become chametz on Pesach. Avol choltin, you could scald it, and then it's baked already. A woman may not soak bran to take with her to the bath to rub on her skin. Why? Because exactly what we said before, it's going to become chametz. But she can take dry bran and rub it on her skin, I guess to exfoliate her skin. A person may not chew chitin, wheat, to put as a bandage on his makkah, on his wound on Pesach, because in all of these cases, it's going to become chametz, and so you cannot create chametz on Pesach.
Even you don't eat it.
Even if you're not going to eat it.
Spit, saliva.
Okay, let's try to finish the Perek here. You cannot put flour into charoses that we use on the Seder, or into mustard on Pesach. Why? Because it's going to become chametz. You have to eat it right away. Rabbi Meir forbids it altogether because of the sharpness of it. He's afraid that it's going to become chametz more quickly.
The flour itself is not chametz.
The flour itself is not chametz. Yeah, you can have kosher Pesach flour. In our day and age, we don't touch flour on Pesach. But once upon a time, they would actually make matzahs on Pesach. Chardal is mustard.
But isn't it? Oh, they didn't
Like
have.
mustard,
Yeah, it's not.
mustard
There's
seeds,
no
right?
no kitnius in the Mishnah. Yeah, sorry. Ein mevashlan sa Pesach loiv mashkin v'loiv made peris. You can now final halacha here. You cannot
Cook.
I'm saying it's not a final halacha. Second to final halacha. Ein mevashlan sa Pesach loiv mashkin v'loiv made peris. You cannot cook the korban Pesach not in any liquids, nor in not in regular liquids, and not in fruit juices. But you can baste them and you can dip them into these liquids. Water that is used by a baker before Pesach, or even on Pesach, has to be poured out because flour is getting mixed in the water and it's going to become chametz. Because they become chametz. So we have finished the second
That was
paragraph.
action packed.